tardes. Bienvenidos al Instituto Cervantes de Nueva Delhi. Es un gran placer hoy, esta sesión muy especial para nosotros, porque no solo vamos a presentar el Quijote en sánscrito, sino que también tenemos el inmenso placer de tener con nosotros el director de los Cervantes de todo el mundo, Luis García Montero, aquí en la primera fila. Well, I guess I will have to shift to the language of Shakespeare instead of Cervantes, but that's what we have. It's really, I said, it's not only Luis García Montero that is here, there are many, many friends and distinguished guests. We have here His Excellency, the Ambassador of Spain, José María Ridao, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Uruguay, Alberto Guani. We have our great friend from the ministry, Pardip Kumar, thanks for being here. So many people actually, and one very special and good friend of mine, very well known here in India, Gurcharan Das. Thanks again for being also with us here today. I would like also to greet the people from Hindu College, especially from the Sanskrit department that are here to enjoy this presentation on the Quixote. My very dear friend from Doordarshan, Sunil Joshi, is here. And also so many Hispanists that are here with us today. Some of them working on translations of Don Quixote. And you will allow me to mention only two this time, although there are many of you and you are all worthy of mention. But if I mention these two, it's because they are part of this book. Their work is discussed in the wonderful introduction of this book, which is Professor Ganguly and Professor Viva Maurya. They both done a lot of research on the reception of Cervantes in India. And as you know, Viva Maurya also translated the whole of Cervantes for the first time from Spanish into Hindi. And there is much also, of course, Mr. S.N. Pandita, who is the grandson of the translators, and also Mr. Mahesh Deokar, coming from Pune, one of the chief editors of the book. But if we must, remember somebody today, especially, is our two translators that in 1936, two Pandits from Kashmir, Jagadhar Zadhu and Nityanand Shastri, did this wonderful work of translating 8 chapters of Don Quixote into Spanish. And there is also a very special guest who could not make it here because of his health. He's right now in Srinagar, and I refer to one other like Dr. Karan Singh, who, even if he could not make it, he has prepared for us, sending a few words. If he's not here in presence, he's in his spirit. Please, could you just pass the message of Dr. Karan Singh from Srinagar?
Ambassador of Spain, Excellency Jose Mario Ridao, Director General Luis Garcia Montero, other representatives of the Cervantes Institute, Professor S.N. Pandita, the well-known Sanskrit scholar from Kashmir, and friends. I was very much hoping on this occasion to be with you. In fact, I had accepted this invitation over a month ago when I thought I was returning to Delhi at the end of June. But for various reasons, my stay in Kashmir has been prolonged, and therefore I'm not able to be with you in person. But on this occasion, I send you my very warm greetings. It is quite remarkable that a Sanskrit translation of Cervantes' great classic Don Quixote by two Kashmiri Pandits should have been published by the Cervantes Institute. Professor S.N. Pandita is a very fine scholar. In fact, it was I who introduced him to Don Quixote. He will tell you the story himself. And now, after all these years, how he has been able to study this great classic, translate it into Sanskrit, is a very big achievement on which I would congratulate.
Well, I think the message ends here. Thanks very much, Dr. Karan Singh, for making your presence felt so closely. I would like to say that Dr. Karan Singh inaugurated this very institute back in 2009. Antato gatva yadi Sanskrit Bhashayam katipani shabdami nabadema tada mamam atmasantushti nasyat. Adya na kevalam visheshavaro asti, visheshavasaro asti, kintu aitihasiko. Yatohi bahu charchitasya, Spanish Bhasha Rachitasya, Upanyashi Shiromanehe, Pustakasya Vimochanam Prastutam Eva Bhavate. Ananda Bahulyat, Agre Nakinchit Bhaktum Shabnomi. Vayam Danya Smaha. Please, I would like to invite our director, General Director, Luis García Montero, to say a few words. Luis. He will speak in Spanish, and that's why we had some simultaneous translation, but I think many of you will understand. Thanks very much.
Sí. Unas palabras para mostrar mi satisfacción por la posibilidad de estar aquí, de compartir con toda la plantilla del Instituto Cervantes y con la Embajada de España, con nuestro embajador José María Ridao, una jornada de trabajo que ha tenido momentos muy satisfactorios, como la reunión con los hispanistas de la India, con la gente que nos ayuda a difundir la lengua y la cultura española en el país, y que en este momento pues alcanza un tiempo de felicidad por la presentación de este libro, de esta traducción al sánscrito de El Quijote, una aventura que empezó en 1935, cuando dos eruditos de Cachemira, utilizando una versión inglesa, tradujeron unos capítulos significativos de El Quijote. La verdad es que el verdadero compromiso con el futuro está en nuestro reconocimiento del pasado. Nosotros nos involucramos en el español como lengua de ciencia, de tecnología, de futuro, pero siendo muy conscientes de nuestra tradición cultural y de nuestro pasado. Y en ese sentido me parece muy significativo que, aunque ya contamos con una magnífica edición del Quijote en hindi, y aunque también se va a publicar pronto en la India una edición en español del Quijote, podamos disfrutar ahora de un Quijote en sánscrito, porque se trata del reconocimiento a la tradición cultural, a una de las lenguas culturales más importantes y más antiguas del mundo, una de las raíces que nos comprometen con el futuro. Don Quijote es un personaje muy particular. Los profesores de literatura española nos hemos acostumbrado a ver cómo en cada momento, en cada tiempo, se hace una meditación sobre el Quijote, una interpretación del Quijote, y se nos recuerda que nuestras reflexiones sobre el presente están muy vinculadas con nuestro diálogo con los autores clásicos. Y en ese sentido, del mismo modo que hace poco celebrábamos también las traducciones del Quijote al chino, yo celebro esta versión en sánscrito, que es un homenaje a los que fueron responsables hace años de esta versión, un reconocimiento a los que ahora han hecho posible su publicación y una conciencia de que la cultura es un ámbito de reflexión que nos vincula a todos y a todas, un ámbito que nos compromete desde el presente con el futuro gracias a nuestro conocimiento del pasado. De manera que una satisfacción estar aquí y celebrar con todos ustedes esta presentación. Muchísimas gracias.
I would like now to invite His Excellency Ambassador of Spain, José María Redondo.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you to you all for being here to this presentation of a great book as Don Quixote. I would like to say that I am very happy to be here in this occasion, because every time I come to Instituto Cervantes is for a great reason, for a good reason, for a marvelous reason. But this evening is a very special one, because we have also Luis García Montero, the director of Instituto Cervantes of the world, and at the same time a great poet in Spain, a well-known poet in Spain. So it's an occasion very special for us, for Instituto Cervantes, and particularly also for me personally, because I had the honor to say that I met Luis García Montero many years ago, and is a good friend of mine and of us. So every time Don Quixote is translated to another language, Don Quixote, the book, is going back home. But in this occasion, it's going back home in a very special manner. Because first of all, the roots, the Oriental roots, if we can say this way, of Don Quixote are very important. Through 1001 Night and the roots of Indian tales in these important books, Cervantes got inspiration to write Don Quixote. The structure of the book is inspired in great measure in these Oriental sources in which India plays a very important role. But it's also going back home in this Sanskrit translation, because Don Quixote is first of all a call for toleration. It's a call for life among different faiths. And it's very important in this moment in the world, in this moment in Spain, in this moment in India, in this moment everywhere. So it's a permanent lesson of tolerance, and it's very important to recognize that Don Quixote is written by an author, Cervantes, who was considered out of the law more or less, and someone who was looking at our society, a very tough society against Muslims and Jews in a very tough manner. So he belonged to these small communities in Spain, and he wrote something very special, defending freedom and tolerance. And there is another reason, the third and last reason why Don Quixote is going back home in this Sanskrit translation. It's because part of you are important Hispanicists in India. So I pay tribute to the translators, but through the translators, to all of you who are working in strengthening our cultural relations, in overcoming this, if you permit me, tiny detail among human beings as is language. So we share a common faith, which is the faith of tolerance, represented in Don Quixote, and you and your work permit us to share more strongly this common faith expressed by Don Quixote. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, Luis, for being here. Thank you, Oscar, for this occasion to address also our friends in Instituto Cervantes. And I assure you that our engagement with Spanish language and Indian culture is stronger everywhere. Thank you very much.
And now I would like to call to the stage Professor Mahesh Deokar from Savitri Bhai Phule Pune University, the chief editor of the book. And also S.N. Pandita, Professor S.N. Pandita, the grandson of the translator Nityanand Shastri, also from the Pandit community. But there is one person missing who has appeared on the screen, and this is really a key man in making this dream possible. And I mean Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov. A big clap for him. He's been perhaps one of the big inspirations, and the artifacts of this work is make a wonderful introduction regarding not only the history about the publication of Don Quixote in Sanskrit, but also about the reception of the translation of the Quixote in India. Thanks, Dr. Dimitrov, for being here today from Germany. It's really a pleasure. I hope you know everything works. And let's start. We will start with Dr. Mahesh Deokar. Then we'll give the floor to Dr. S.N. Sorry. After we'll give the floor to Professor Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov. And closing this session will be Professor S.N. Pandita, who will tell us about the whole experience and his personal relation with this incredible text and the story behind it. Thanks very much. Professor Mahesh Deokar, you have the floor. Thanks.
Namo Namah. So it's indeed a proud moment for me as a chief editor of the Pune Indological series, under which this book has been published. I must thank Oscar Pujo and the entire team of the Cervantes Institute for organizing this program here. Because to bring out a book, sometimes it's such a job, and especially something special like Don Quixote's translation. This has been a great effort on our part, which has been done in collaboration. It is not one person's job. I'm just representing the team in Pune. Just as we have seen, this Sanskrit translation was also a result of a collaboration, right, among the Sanskrit Pandits in Kashmir, then Orlstein, Keller, all these people, when they came together and formed the team, we had this wonderful production, right, this wonderful result. And what we did almost 85 years after this translation was done is to bring it to people, those who are lovers of Cervantes and also lovers of Sanskrit. And this has been a collaboration between the University of Marburg, which is represented by Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov, with whom I'm working for last 10 years on different projects. When he came to Pune as a Kensei Foundation India visiting professor, that time we decided to work together on this project. And it was such a wonderful collaboration because we also decided to have a audio book with it. So a scholar from Pune, Professor Shrikant Bahulkar, was involved. And then Dragomir had this wonderful font, Schlegel font, which also has a history of 200 years, was brought in. And then we involved an institution in Pune called Center of Data Analysis and Advanced Computing called CDAC. So this was a collaboration of 3 institutes and many persons. Dragomir will talk much in detail about this collaboration, but what I would like to share here is that we at the Department of Pali and Buddhist Studies, as we are called, under the Savitribai Phule Pune University, which is a state university in Pune, we have this series called Pune Ideological Series, under which we publish works of high standards in terms of research and also novelty. So Don Quixote's this particular edition has been a 3rd volume in the series. The first 2 have been a kind of a text called Edit or Not to Edit. So this is something which is specifically devoted to editing of Sanskrit text, and that also has some strong connection with the Kashmiri text. I mean, since Mr. Pandita is here, so Jürgen Haneder, the author from Germany, he works mainly in the field of Kashmir Shaivism, and he has brought out this book with lots of examples from the texts from that tradition. And then we had Haribhatta's Jatakamala, which is a well-known Buddhist text of Buddhist narratives, was also kind of edited by our friend Martin Schraube from Germany. And this was the 3rd in the series. Dragomir has really worked very hard on this project, and he was responsible for bringing everything together. I was just a catalyst. I did not do anything, but I mean, there are some people who are there to take the credit. I'm not taking the credits on behalf of the entire team, but it is his efforts which actually brought the book, to the light. And I'm really happy and proud to say that this is a wonderful production, not just in terms of its contents, but also the way the book appears, its physical appearance. I mean, you can actually enjoy the book just by looking at it, touching it. So with all your senses, I must say. So I'm really thankful to Oscar and the Cervantes Institute for making this possible today, because I think you are all Cervantes lovers, and it's a really great joy that a classical writer from Spain, and now his text is translated into the classical language of India, Sanskrit, and now these 2 are coming together. I think there's nothing more special than that. So I'm really thankful to all the dignitaries who have especially come here. Dr. Pandita, Mr. Pandita is here, Dragomir is here. We also have the dignitaries, His Excellency from Spain and Uruguay, and also we had the Director General of Cervantes Institute. So I'm really thankful to all of you for making it possible here. Also, if possible, I would like to offer this books to yes, just said one to you to represent the Cervantes Institute. This is a publication again by the Department of Pali. It's a multilingual dictionary of Pali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, of Buddhist terms in English, and then so this I would like to present to you. can use of the dictionary. Pali, Sanskrit, and Tibetan, three important languages of Buddhism. And these are three classical languages. And I would like to present to the
So His Excellency, Jose Maria Regal, please come on the stage. And also our General Director, please come to the stage. And as you see, there is also an audio book. And there is another scholar who couldn't make here today, but he's a very senior Sanskrit scholar, so much of knowledge in India. And I mean to mention Shrikan Bahulkar, who is the one who recited the Sanskrit text for the audio book. Thanks very much, all of you, for this wonderful edition, for this big effort. Dragomir, it's a hope to see you in Delhi next time. I know that you have a very busy end of academic course there in Germany, but it's really such a pleasure to have you here, even in a virtual form. So I give the floor to you. I think we would like to know, from first hand, how all this came about. So you have the floor, Dragomir.
Thank you. Just please confirm that you hear me.
Yeah. We do.
Okay.
Loud and clear, really.
Okay, I had initial problems to hear you, so I actually missed all the initial speeches by the honorable guests. I only heard Mahesh, and afterwards, I hope that my voice is now coming, and I will start now a kind of presentation, so I'll share now my screen with you. Okay, it works. Your Excellency Ambassador Jose Dominguez, estimado Señor Luis Montero, dear Dr. Puyol, dear guests, colleagues and friends, it gives me immense pleasure to say today a few words about Volume 3 of the Pune Indological series, containing The partial Sanskrit translation of Cervantes' Don Quixote. As you all know, after the first part of the Spanish original appeared in Madrid in the beginning of 1605, it acquired a great popularity in Europe and within just a few years gained the status of what nowadays one would call a cult book, or as some experts have qualified it, a phenomenal and worldwide bestseller, the most Catholic book of all time, which, judged by any test, whether of authority or of vogue, must be accounted among the foremost books of the world. The sequel was released in the winter of 1615, only a few months before Cervantes passed away at the age of 69 on April the 22nd, 1616, in Madrid. He was buried one day later, some 10 days before another giant of world literature, namely William Shakespeare, passed away in Stratford-upon-Avon. There are two main things which brought me as an Indologist to Cervantes' Spanish classic. First, I have always been attracted by the idea of studying the traces of the Spanish Hidalgo in India. Second, as soon as I became aware of the fact that the Sanskrit Don Quixote had already engaged the interest of a number of intelligent people, I thought that it cannot be so foolish to invest some more time and efforts into this utterly quixotic affair. Ever since I first listened to the magnificent album West Meets East with Pandit Ravi Shankar, Ustad Alaraka and Maestro Yehudi Menuhin years ago, I have been admiring people who come from different traditions and while crossing various borders create something together which many other people can then appreciate irrespective of their own heritage. Once Cervantes' masterpiece finally reached India in the last quarter of the 19th century, it led to a series of intercultural encounters with the participation of India, one of the great sources of global civilization, as Menuhin himself once described this part of the world. It is, however, not a secret that the reception of Don Quixote in India has been poorly studied, and as the Indian Hispanist Shyama Prasad Ganguly wrote more than 15 years ago, I quote, "There has hardly been any intellectual engagement with the text in India, and even for translations there is a total dearth of organized data." End of quote. Ganguly tried to rectify the dire situation, yet even in his own writings on the subject at least 2 or 3 glaring gaps remained, which I attempted to fill to some extent with the material contained in the book presented to you today. One of these gaps concerns a remarkable yet long-forgotten Gujarati translation entitled Don Quixote, which was published in Mumbai in the 1880s. Even though bibliographic data concerning this important publication has been actually easily available since 1908 at the latest, when the copy of the then British Museum was catalogued for the first time, it has been neglected by Hispanists, including those in India. The main reason for not noticing this Gujarati translation is its extremely poor accessibility. The few details which can be read in the old catalogues are based on a single copy containing only one part of the text, presently kept in the British Library. The available book is undated and contains no information about the translator and the English version which was used by him for rendering the text into Gujarati. Since, however, the book originally belonged to the rich Cervantes collection of Henry Spencer Ashby, a flamboyant Victorian book collector and bibliographer, and was bequeathed to the then British Museum after his death in July 1900, it was possible to conclude that the Gujarati translation must have been published before this year. The title page of Ashby's copy in the British Library makes it clear that this translation was initially printed on a monthly basis, and its subscribers received 12 issues per year. Yet, since no other copies were known to exist, it could be easily assumed that the translation was not continued and only the text of the first 41 chapters was rendered into Gujarati. This was indeed what the few experts in London initially believed, even though anyone who would have consulted Scribner's record for September 1889 would have immediately realized that this assumption cannot be correct. As is evident from the bibliographic information, by the end of 1888, the complete Gujarati translation of Don Quixote must have already been available in a single volume comprising 746 pages. Several years ago, I was fortunate to come in contact with the late Jayant Meghani, a prominent Gujarati intellectual, who was the son of the well-known Gujarati writer Jawarchand Meghani, and in his family library, the entire Gujarati translation mentioned in Tribhuvan's record has been preserved. With this absolute rarity at my disposal, I was able to conclude that the Gujarati Don Quixote was first printed in monthly issues beginning in November 1885, and in the last quarter of 1886, one part of this translation was published in the form of a book, followed in 1888 by the publication of the entire work. The overlooked Gujarati translation precedes thus Bipin Bihari Chakrabarti's Bengali adaptation Adbhut Digvijoy by a few years, and may be considered now to be the earliest complete translation of Don Quixote from English in India. It is a book typeset with so much care and taste which hardly any later Indian edition has managed to match. The credit for this goes to Jahangir Bijanji Karani, who in the second half of the 19th century became one of the most illustrious Parsi booksellers, publishers, printers, and Gujarati typographers in Mumbai. The earliest Gujarati translation of Don Quixote escaped Shema Prasad Ganguly's attention, but he has been lucky enough to learn personally from Surendranath Pandita about the availability of another two incarnations of the Spanish Mahavir, namely the partial translations from English into Sanskrit and Kashmiri. As you already know, the Sanskrit text was prepared by Pandit Jagadhar Zadhu and his senior colleague Pandit Nidhan Shastri in the 1930s in Srinagar. I became motivated to work on this edition not only due to the fact that this Sanskrit text represents the fruit of a highly intriguing West-East cultural encounter, but also because, besides the two repeated Kashmiri Pandits, several other learned people have also been involved in it in one way or the other, and this naturally aroused my curiosity. I must stress here that without the initiative of Surendranath Pandita, who in 2002 drew the scholarly attention towards the existing manuscripts of partial Kashmiri and Sanskrit translations of Don Quixote and provided some interesting details about the work by his grandfather Nidhan Shastri, I would not have had the occasion to talk to you today and would not have made so many pleasant encounters in the recent past as well as now. Some 10 years ago, my colleague Stanislav Hyaga, the young man on the left side with the blue shirt, read Pandita's groundbreaking article in Marburg and suggested to Professor Jürgen Haneder, the gentleman hiding behind Professor Delka, to have a closer look at the Sanskrit manuscript. I happened to be in Philadelphia at that time and was able to procure a digital copy of the entire codex kept in the Houghton Library at Harvard University, which is, by the way, thus incomparably easier than getting access to materials locked in the invincible citadel of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, for example. Once we had the manuscript at hand, in the summer term of 2012, we started studying it during regular meetings in Germany. We read the entire work at a leisurely pace, along with several translations in English and German, occasionally comparing the Sanskrit text with the Spanish original and the Hindi translation by Vibha Maurya. The direct use of the Sanskrit version allowed the participants of this class to draw some important conclusions about the nature of the Sanskrit text and the sources used by the translators. In 2015, Haneder communicated in Paris and in Pune some of the preliminary results reached during our reading sessions. At the same time, he also compiled the first draft of an edition of the Sanskrit text. Equipped with Pandita's publications, Haneder's materials, and the notes I used to take down myself, I decided to go ahead with the idea of bringing out a bilingual English Sanskrit edition of those parts of the text which have been translated by Jagadhar Zadhu and Nidhan Shastri. For this purpose, the manuscript of the Sanskrit text was checked carefully one more time, a critical apparatus was supplied, and the entire work was presented on facing pages with the English version by Charles Jarvis on the left-hand side and the Sanskrit translation typeset with the newly prepared historical reconstruction of the Schlegel Schrift on the right-hand side. The original font was designed some 200 years ago in Paris by August Wilhelm von Schlegel, an esteemed literary critic and translator, but also one of the first German Sanskritists who since 1818 occupied the first chair of Indology in Germany. Kishore Patil from the Center for Development of Advanced Computing in Pune was so kind to prepare, at my suggestion, the Unicode incarnation of this typographic beauty. Besides the printed edition, I had the privilege of adding to our Quixote package an audiobook with the complete recording of the Sanskrit text read by Professor Shrikant Bahulkar, a renowned Indologist from Pune. This is a Sanskrit audiobook of nearly 5 hours and a half, with short interludes of medieval Spanish music played by Maestro Jordi Savall and his orchestra, with a tabla accompaniment subsequently prepared and added by my son's guru, Anup Gaipat from Pune. This is in short what you'll find in volume 3 of the Pune Logical series and how it came to be. In the introduction to the book, you'll also be able to read in detail about the history of the Sanskrit translation, which has been well documented in a number of letters preserved in several archives and included in the present volume. To put it in a nutshell, it all began with the whim of an affluent American by the name of Carl Tilden Keller. After graduating at Harvard, he made a career in the field of accountancy, and not unlike Henry Spencer Ashby, could afford the luxury of becoming an avid book collector. Keller was especially keen to obtain translations of Don Quixote in all possible languages and passionately kept record of their number in his collection. In his search for Don Quixote materials from India, his cordial relationship with Sir Mark Oro Stein proved most conducive. This enabled Keller to enrich his collection with Indian versions in at least 3 different languages, namely Urdu, Kashmiri, and Sanskrit. Keller communicated his idea about the Kashmiri and the Sanskrit translations in a letter to Stein dated April 6, 1935. I'm going to ask you something which may seem awfully silly, but if you're a book collector, you are of course silly. I was wondering if I couldn't have an abbreviated translation made into Sanskrit, Kashmiri, Prakrit, or Pali. I intend to write to Baron von Steyr-Holstein and find out if he can have it done in Tibetan. And I shall also write to Owen Lattimore and ask him if it can be done in Manchu and Mongolian. Did you ever hear of such nonsense? Quite remarkably, it took only about 2 years for Keller to see all his extravagant ideas accomplished. In 1937, he could boast of having a partial translation in Manchu in 4 volumes, in Mongolian in a volume of 112 leaves, and in Tibetan in a volume of 151 leaves. The Sanskrit and Kashmiri translations of Don Quixote were completed even faster, by the end of August and September 1936, respectively. In his reply to Keller, dated May 3, 1935, Stein wrote, "The only person whom I know in Kashmir capable of intelligently rendering from English into the immortal story is Pandit Nityanand. I hope to see that worthy old friend before the end of this month and shall then find out whether he is prepared to take up the task and what the suitable remuneration would have to be." As the rapidly following events in 1935 to 1937 proved, Nityanand Shastri and his younger colleague Jagadhar Zadhu more than exceeded Stein's expectations. A set of Cervantes' Don Quixote in the English translation of Charles Jarvis arrived in Srinagar on October 13, 1935. And by the end of November, the work on the Sanskrit and Kashmiri translations had already begun. By February 1936, no one less than Sir George Grierson had become aware of this enterprise, which he wholeheartedly supported and was looking to see the Kashmiri translation in printed form. Before the end of August 1936, the Sanskrit translation was completed, and the Kashmiri one was to follow very soon, as Zadhu himself informed Stein in a letter which he received with a manuscript on September 22, 1936, in northwestern Iran. The Sanskrit manuscript was sent back to Srinagar to be recopied by a calligrapher on Kashmiri paper. In the meantime, on October 16, 1936, the manuscript of the Kashmiri translation, in Zadhu's own handwriting, reached Stein in Kermanshah in Iran, who immediately forwarded it to Boston, where it reached in the winter of 1936. The beautiful fair copy of the Sanskrit translation was ready in the beginning of 1937, and it reached Keller in Boston via London on April 21, 1937. Since this time, both manuscripts have been kept in Harvard, and it seems that very few people have ever consulted them there. A notable exception is the American Indologist Charles Rockwell Landman, who carefully read the Sanskrit translation in Boston and moreover added some very useful corrections. I may conclude pointing out that Nityanand Shastri and Jagadhar Zadhu produced indeed lovely Sanskrit and Kashmiri translations of Don Quixote, which more than 80 years later we still read with great satisfaction and gratitude. What we have today is the fruit of boundless intellectual curiosity, lasting friendship, full dedication, aesthetic pleasure, and most of all, vast and untarnished knowledge. The work initiated out of the childish desire of an inquisitive American actively facilitated and arranged by a Hungarian-born British scholar and completed by two highly capable and open-minded Indian pundits who rendered into Sanskrit and Kashmiri Charles Jarvis's English translation of Cervantes' Spanish classic, provides a wonderful example of a glorious West-East and East-West encounter. I believe that wise people such as Ravi Shankar, Alaraka, Yehudi Menuhin, Keller, Stein, Shastri, Zadhu, and the like have done is really worth to be known, enjoyed, and emulated to the benefit of all. As I can hardly formulate it any better, let me quote, in the end, a few lines which John Lennon sang in his song, You're Here. East is East, and West is West. The twain shall meet. East is West, and West is East. Let it be complete. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Dimitrov, for this short but really interesting presentation. I really advise everyone to read the introduction by Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov, which is a great contribution to the history of the reception of the Cervantes in India. I would like now to invite S.N. Pandit, who can speak from there here, to give. He's the grandson of Nityan and Shastri. Stay with us, Dr. Dimitrov, and please give your personal appreciation.
Good evening, all distinguished guests. I'm really short of words what to speak when so much has been already spoken. But I take this as a moment of personal pride and would like to share few facts about this great work, European classical literature, immortal Don Quixote. It's a special honor and privilege to stand before this learned assembly and share few facts connected with the Sanskrit translation of this great Spanish classic. The opportunity is a moment of personal pride, and I thank Dr. Pujol for this consideration. Perhaps also the opportunity comes from the burden of eminence of my ancestor, who among many others more eminent than him was engaged in the Sanskrit translation of this classic, now brought to light by my great friend and the eminent editor of the book, Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov of the University of Marburg. I congratulate him for having produced an outstanding piece of scholarship. I also convey my warm felicitations to the Department of Savitribai Phule Pune University for bringing out this excellent edition, and my special thanks go to Professor Mahesh Diawkar for lending permanence to this work by publishing the book. The late 19th and 20th century marked a period of vibrant interface of scholarship in Kashmir that flourished between the Western and Kashmiri scholars during the rule of the Dogras in Jammu and Kashmir, that's Dr. Karan Singh's ancestors. Duly patronized and supported by the successive Dogra Maharajas, the interface of scholarship was predominantly unidirectional, in which mainly works of very Kashmiri language, literature, culture and history were dealt a scholarly treatment by the collaborating Western and Kashmiri scholars. However, the twin translations of Don Quixote in Sanskrit and Kashmiri, prepared jointly by my grandfather Nityanand Shastri and Jagadhar Zadhu in 1936-37, are a singular exception in this collaborative league, when instead of a Kashmiri work being embellished by European hands, it was the West which sought the hand of Kashmiri scholars to embellish the literature with the Sanskrit and Kashmiri translation of one of the greatest European works. While the edition of Kashmir's 12th century chronicle, Kalahana's Rajasthanini by Oral Stein in 1892, marked the beginning of the interface of collaborative scholarship. The Sanskrit and Kashmiri translations of the 17th century Spanish classic, prepared in 1937, marked the pinnacle of the period of collaborative scholarship and also a historical culmination of this great interface in scholarship between the West and Kashmir. It all began as a result of intimate and lifelong friendship between my grandfather and Sir Aurel Stein, the great Sanskrit scholar and explorer, when he secured these translations, as already narrated by Dr. Dragomir, from my grandfather on behalf of his Harvard friend Carl Tilden Keller, the great champion who promoted the legacy of Don Quixote in the 20th century like no other. Sometime by 1945, he had more than 700 translations of this great classic in almost all the major languages of the world. However, Keller did not have the Sanskrit and Kashmiri translations until 1935, when he sought to get them prepared in Kashmir through Stein's help, who had close scholarly contacts there. At the time when these translations were solicited by Stein from my grandfather, he unfortunately, my grandfather, was afflicted with paralysis, but yet he did not disappoint his friend Stein and accepted the task of his friend. Incapacitated to write himself, Stein suggested that my father, who knew Sanskrit quite well, was at the time holder of a merit Sanskrit scholarship during his college term, would act as a literary hand, amanuensis to my grandfather, and take down the dictation of the translation from him. However, this arrangement, for reasons unknown to me, did not come through. Following this unmaterialized arrangement, Jagadhar Zadu became the co-translator. At another level, Jagadhar Zadu had replaced my grandfather as professor of Sanskrit at the famous Shri Pratap College, Srinagar, following his retirement from the Maharaja's service in 1931. But more importantly, besides, there was also a very close family relationship between them. Jagadhar's eldest daughter was married to my uncle, that's Nityanand's second son. And obviously these proximities between my grandfather and Pandit Jagadhar naturally also forged into a scholarly collaboration. Nonetheless, my father's link with Sanskrit translation of Don Quixote did not cease. It survives in several letters my grandfather wrote to Stein during the period the translations were underway. These letters are written in my father's handwriting, as he wrote them on behalf of his father, who could not hold the pen due to paralysis. Presently, these letters, discovered by Dr. Dragomir, are housed along with other Carl Keller papers in the Houghton Library at Harvard University. We now also know, as a result of Dr. Dragomir's indefatigable research, that these translations, originally both written in Jagadhar Zadu's hand, were completed in about a year and a half, despite my grandfather's paralysis. Of the two translations, Sanskrit and Kashmiri, I myself became familiar with the manuscript of the Kashmiri translation when my aunt, nearly 25 years ago, gifted me the photographic plates of the original translation of the Kashmiri manuscript. It was transmitted from Boston to my grandfather to get a calligraphic copy of it prepared, perhaps for a printed edition. The proposition, however, never materialized at that time, and we still have an unpublished Kashmiri Don Quixote. What remained was only the family folklore, connected with the enterprise of my grandfather and his friend Stein's request. Coming to the Sanskrit translation and having produced an impeccable piece of scholarship, Dr. Dragomir undoubtedly has earned the admiration of the scholarly fraternity, there is no doubt. But for me and our extended family, he has earned our lifelong gratitude by bringing out this work of my grandfather and Jagadhar Zadu from long forlorn neglect, anonymity, as the manuscript lay unknown and abandoned on the shelves of the Harvard University's Houghton Library in the US for nearly 8 decades, since the time they were deposited there sometime in 1937. It's therefore a matter of great satisfaction for me that the Sanskrit translation of Don Quixote and the story connected to the translation that had reduced merely to our family folklore for 4 generations is now before all of us, and all due to Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov's brilliant work. Here I must also express my profound gratitude and admiration for Dragomir's 2 colleagues at Marburg University, Professor Stanislav Jagger, who in the first instance discovered the Sanskrit and Kashmiri manuscripts in the Houghton Library in 2011, which was followed by reading sessions, as Dr. Dragomir already informed us, by Sanskrit translations by of the Sanskrit translation by Professor Hanider and many others at Pune until 2017, when finally Dr. Dragomir embarked to produce the edited volume. I must close here by stating that Kashmiri and Sanskrit translations of Don Quixote are Kashmir's greatest contribution to the Western literature. They are also a landmark of Indo-Spanish cultural ties and stand testimony to the lifelong friendship between Aurel Stein and my grandfather. Significantly, the edited Sanskrit translation prepared by Dr. Dragomir Dimitrov also marks a noble tribute to that joint enterprise of an immortal icon of Western scholarship, Sir Aurel Stein, and 2 Sanskrit savants of Kashmir, of the Eastern learning. I wish the Kashmiri translations too follow the Sanskrit way, and we may hope to have published it without any long delay. Thank you all. My greetings to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Pandita. It is really a wonderful story, this. We see here the connection between so many different people from so many different countries, united by the common thread, which is culture. And that in the shape of Don Quixote. And I think it's a really a huge message, as both our director said and our ambassador says, how culture, unites us in a way beyond disputes. How, Aurel Stein and the American and book collector, and now Dragomir and yourself and we here all together, in a wonderful way, in almost miraculous way, we are able to be here today and celebrate, such opportunity when cultures, without seeing, which language we speak, which country we belong, which religion we practice, which race we are, makes us a common partners in this wonderful story. Thanks very much, all of you, Dr. Dimitrov, Dr. Dragomir, S.N. Pandita, Mahesh Deokar, Shirkan Bahulkar, even if you cannot be here. And I would like now to call to the stage both the ambassador and the director of the Cervantes of the World for a group photograph. Please come to the stage, and with that we will finish our... After there is a cocktail, to celebrate this good news. Please come. Yeah, the books are there for sale if anyone cares. Okay. There's some. very much.
Dragomir also in the photograph. Flowers.
Oh, no, we are. There we are.